speak. A user journey. We talk a lot about user journeys in the public sector. In fact, it's from a citizen-centric view through to the user journey. It's the kind of the next big thing. So imagine my delight as well when GDS come out with the user view. We're going to focus on the user. It's all the right words, but having spent 20 years, as Michael alluded to, writing about the public sector and technology in the public sector, as managing editor at UKAuthority.com, I've written for The Guardian, the MJ, Local Government IT and Use, Town Hall newsletter. I've got a good idea of how the public sector works and of the technology that's in place in the public sector. And since September, I'm the managing editor of the local digital campaign, DCRG's campaign, to engender the digital culture shift that was going to be needed to join our public sector. So I do have a viewpoint that I understand the sector, but I'm also a wife and a mother to 3 small boys, one of whom has a complex disability. So I'd say I'm a heavy user of public services, that I'm informed, but I struggle to get the support that my son needs. So I love this GDS. Post-it note on the window. User focus. It's all about the user focus. Cut out, look at the man in the street or the woman in the street, that's your user. The problem with that, though, is that we're still on the inside looking out. So we're still in the public sector looking out. And if I'm the man on the street, that's what it looks like. Any guesses as to where that window is, or the post-it note? Well, that's how the public services appear to us. So let's make it real. I don't know, as a parent, how to help. And here's my child, Charlie, so we're going to make it personal. And he's very happy and very excited that you're going to look at his photo. He's very proud of his wheelchair with the spider wheels. But he's also very proud of the fact that he can walk, he can run. When his muscles aren't working, he needs a ventilator, that's the blue bag. Catheters, because he's incontinent. And he takes a number of drugs each day to keep him breathing. So he's quite complicated. I mean, we are involved in a lot of public services. And you'd think that this would be coordinated. Because if we get this right, if we keep my child healthy and we keep him happy, and he doesn't cost a lot of money to the state. If it goes wrong, he ends up in hospital on a ventilator. My husband and I lose our jobs because we can't keep 3 children and being permanent carers of just a very fundamentally disabled child at that point. And the fallout and the cost, the net cost to the public sector is huge. And we're not the only family like this. I run a charity supporting families with the same disease, so it's congenital myasthenic syndrome, very rare neuromuscular disease. And the fallout is real. There are children who, because they don't get the ventilator at home, they end up in intensive care every other month, which costs hundreds of thousands of pounds. But navigating that to get the care that you need, I have a degree, I'm a journalist, I'm used to researching, I understand how the public sector works. It drives me insane. I know you've all got technology, you've all got the emails there, and after 8 years, a lot of people do email me, that's okay now. But at the beginning, we're with 6 different hospitals, and they are the leading hospitals, the leading London hospitals for respiratory, for neuromuscular, for paediatrics. And we still get a little paper report after each meeting with a tick for the distribution list, and there's usually a page or 2 missing, and I go to the next consultant and they haven't got their copy. So we're forever trying to keep people up to date and share information. The irony of it is, though, that those reports increasingly say checked and signed electronically, and I still get a printout. So does everybody else. And they don't deal with the community health. So over here you've got the community health, you've got the physios, the occupational therapists, speech and language, continence service, wheelchair service, health visitor GP. They don't actually all operate in the same offices and the same systems, so they don't communicate either. They don't have a shared record of my child. Then I've got school and the one-to-ones, because he has to have a one-to-one with him the whole time, his hands don't work. And the SEN team, the special education needs team, the educational psychologists, they don't operate in the same realm as the social services child disability team, or the social services occupational therapists who do your requirements for grants for disabled living facilities, for making your house appropriate. That's from the county council, but then I know that disabled living and facilities grants officers in the district, and you have to go through planning in the district who hasn't read the social services. And it goes round and round. And then you have to go and apply to council tax benefits from the same district council, which they've just given you a grant because your child's disabled. This is madness. The worst bit, though, is I then get a form from DWP that goes, your disabled living facility is up for, disabled living allowance is up for review. Can you prove that your child's disabled? Really? Hello? I'm selling catheters on eBay. You know, what parent in their right minds wants a wheelchair for their child? wants to be involved with the continence service. You know, this isn't me. I have to go and get a report from these people. It took me 3 months, because I do things a little bit extreme, so I researched it. I got reports from everybody detailing all his needs, what he needs, when, where and how, and the amount of time it takes us every day to look after our child. And night, because he needs drugs in the night or a ventilator, so it does get, you know, it's quite complicated, and we do get the higher living allowances, which is great support. But why? Why do I have to do that? Because this information is there. All they have to do is send an email to check a box. Does this child have a wheelchair? Yeah. Does this child use catheters? Yeah. Do they have a ventilator? Yeah. Why do I have to spend 3 months of my life doing that? And the worst thing is that we're supporting families who both parents have left school, and because our educational system has failed them profoundly, they're functionally illiterate. They do not have a hope in hell of navigating this. And there's nobody there, there's nobody coordinating, there's nobody there to point them in the right direction and tell them what they need. And their children end up in hospital. They go on a downward spiral. And the fallout is enormous. We've had parents who've been sacked because their child was in intensive care for 6 months. They lost their job. It's illegal. Of course it's illegal. But you don't have the ability, the financial ability to take that to court, or the emotional ability by that time, because your child's dying. And they lose their jobs. But we can stop that happening by being proactive. And it's all there. It's focusing on the user. It's focusing on the user as a whole, sharing information to make that journey easier, to tell them what they need and where they need it and how they need it, to join up the dots. Because on the inside, we know where that works. You know, if your child has mobility problems, they're going to need a wheelchair. Why do we not sort that out for them? Why do we make it a problem they have to fight for everything? And it's about changing the culture to break down professional silos where, seriously, I've had consultants who have written to social services occupational therapists with a 2-page fantastic academic article about the genetic implications of my son's disease, because it is a rare disease case and he's in research. Fascinating. But does that tell the occupational therapist that he needs a wet room, a washing drying toilet instead? No. You know, this poor woman had no idea what this whole article was about. So people speak different languages, they don't collaborate, but the technology can make that different, and that's my passion, is that I believe that if we focus on digital, because believe me, most parents of disabled children, they are black belts at Google Food, they are on social media, it is their lifeline, because you can't get respite care, so how else do you communicate with the outside world? So they're on digital, why don't we take the conversation to them, why don't we engage with them where they are? Why don't we use the data that we have to identify common journeys, to predict outcomes, to share clinical and therapeutic best practice, because it is patchy. And the support in schools and the support that they need from their council and benefits, you have to fight, no one tells you. But we can do that, we can be proactive with the data that we have. And when you get to the rare disease world and you look at genome, whole exome and genome sequencing, when we're talking big data, we're talking really big data coming. And we have the ability to use that in terribly exciting ways. And underneath all of that, we already have the technology, we have the infrastructure, the legacy infrastructure is there that will enable us, with a little bit of cultural change, to communicate, because actually I do believe it is culture now. I think the technology is there, and that the will and the use of the social media and digital technologies by the citizen, it's there. It's about us wanting to do this. And I wouldn't resist, I'm afraid. I have to tell you about myasthenia, which is the disease my son has. There's a genetic version, which is 1 or 2 in a million. There's also an autoimmune version, which is 1 in 10,000. It's a problem between the nerve and the muscles, in that the signal doesn't get through properly. It's characterised by muscle weakness and fatigue, and it's rapid and fluctuating. The reason I always want to say is that you can see that, you know, at one point his eyes look great, 2 hours later he can't sit on a chair, he can't open his eyes physically or eat, and he'll choke. And it's a fatiguing weakness. So the longer he looks at the camera, the less he can open his eyes or smile until he can't open his eyes. He physically cannot open his eyes. And that happens to his breathing muscles and his hands and his legs. But the autoimmune version comes on in old age. So if you see someone who has this fluctuation, sometimes they sound slurred, they might sound like they're drunk, but they're not drunk. You might just save a life by saying, hey, go and talk about myasthenia to your doctor, because there are drugs that can save lives. Because without it, you can die, because you stop breathing. And thank you, that's me.